We will look at the process of photosynthesis in this lecture. Photosynthesis occurs when organisms capture light energy and use it to synthesize carbohydrates. Here's the chemical reaction for photosynthesis. 6 carbon dioxide molecules react with 6 water molecules with the help of light energy. This gives us the products glucose and oxygen. So where do these marvelous reactions take place? While many organisms like this algae has the ability to photosynthesize, we will examine plants in detail, and in plants photosynthesis primarily occurs in the leaves. Why the leaves? Well, let's take a closer look. Closer, closer. There we go. Now we can see the anatomy of the leaf. This cross-section shows many important features. A layer of cells covers the leaf called the epidermis. The upper epidermis secretes a waxy cuticle to protect the leaf, while embedded within the lower epidermis are stomata, which are pores that allow the entry of carbon dioxide and the departure of oxygen from the leaf. This can occur when the stomata are open, but this also allows water to escape from the leaf. So in hot conditions, they usually close and photosynthesis slows down. The vascular bundles in the leaf, sometimes called veins, carry water and other nutrients to the leaf cells and export sugars to non-photosynthetic structures. Sandwiched between the epidermal layers and surrounding the vascular bundles are mesophyll cells. These cells contain the bulk of the chloroplasts found in most plants. Let's take a closer look at a chloroplast. The chloroplast is surrounded by a double membrane. The stroma is the space the inner membrane surrounds. Enzymes for the synthesis of carbohydrate molecules are in the stroma. Pigments necessary for the light-capturing reactions of photosynthesis are part of the thylakoid membranes. So the chloroplast is the site of photosynthetic reactions. There are 2 main stages of photosynthesis. The light reactions are named so because they are dependent on light. These reactions convert light energy into chemical energy. Whereas the Calvin cycle does not directly need light to occur. In these reactions, carbon is fixed into carbohydrate molecules. Let's look at an overview of these 2 main stages. In the light reactions, we are concerned with certain reactants and products of the photosynthetic equation. Water and light energy are on the reactant side. Oxygen is on the product side. Because pigment molecules in the thylakoid membrane captures light energy and converts it into chemical energy. Specifically, the molecules ATP and NADPH are created. Then water is hydrolyzed to re-energize the system and oxygen is created. Here is a diagram to show you the important steps of the light reactions. Energy from the sun is captured by pigments in the thylakoids and are converted into the energy-carrying molecules ATP and NADH. Water molecules are used to replenish the system's energy, and oxygen molecules are created as a byproduct. In the Calvin cycle, carbon dioxide is on the reactant side, glucose is on the product side. Enzymes in the stroma build high-energy glucose molecules by using carbon atoms from carbon dioxide and energy from the molecules made during the light reactions, ATP and NADPH. So here we have the carbon dioxide molecules entering the Calvin cycle. The energy from ATP and NADPH being transferred to the cycle, and glucose molecules being made. Okay, now time for the details. Let's start with the light reactions. First, exactly how is the light energy captured? Well, first we have to find out what light energy is. The sun radiates electromagnetic energy. Some of this is in the form of photons, which are small particles of energy with different wavelengths or energy levels. This diagram shows the spectrum of electromagnetic energy levels. While the sun radiates many different kinds of energy, visible light is more energetic than infrared radiation. This is the type of energy that is responsible for much of the heating of the Earth. Visible light is less energetic than ultraviolet radiation. Ultraviolet radiation is the type of energy that is responsible for your skin getting sunburned. Visible light is composed of a range of wavelengths. Shorter wavelengths, like violet light, have high energy levels, while longer wavelengths, like red light, have lower energy levels. Different pigments in thylakoids absorb different wavelengths of light, and therefore different energy levels. The main pigments in most plants are chlorophylls, which are green in color. Other pigments called carotenoids range from yellow to red. So these pigment molecules can absorb or trap light energy of certain wavelengths, or they can reflect the wavelength, or they can allow the wavelength to transmit or pass through the pigment. If a wavelength of visible light is absorbed, we do not see this color. The color black is seen if all wavelengths are absorbed. If the wavelength is reflected, we do see the color. White is seen if all wavelengths are reflected. If the wavelength is transmitted, we see through the object. Glass consists of particles that transmit visible light wavelengths. This diagram shows the pigments in the thylakoids primarily absorbing all wavelengths except the green light wavelengths, which may be reflected or transmitted. This graph shows the absorption levels of plant pigments at different light wavelengths. Light absorption is on the x-axis, while the wavelengths in nanometers are on the y-axis. Chlorophyll, the blue and green curves, strongly absorbs violet, blue, and red light. Carotenoids, the orange curve, absorb blue and green wavelengths. Make sure you know how to read this diagram. Where were these pigments located? Ah, yes, the thylakoid membrane. But they won't be alone. We will find that chlorophyll forms the antenna complex that captures the photons. Chlorophyll, along with other pigments like carotenoids, are all wrapped up in proteins to form the photosystem, and the photosystem is embedded in the thylakoid membrane. The pigments transfer energy to the center of the photosystem, the reaction center. From there, the energy is transferred out of the photosystem. Two types of photosystems exist, PS1 and PS2. So the light reactions of photosynthesis are occurring along the thylakoid membrane in the chloroplast. Now, scientists found PS2 before PS1, but it is actually activated first and produces ATP. Let's see how. Photons are absorbed by the pigments in PS2, and then that energy is transferred from one pigment molecule to the next until this energy reaches the reaction center of the photosystem. Within the reaction center are special chlorophyll molecules called P680 because they absorb wavelengths most efficiently with a wavelength of 680 nanometers. When energized, the chlorophyll boosts electrons out of the reaction center to an acceptor molecule called phenophytin, who then transfers the electrons to an electron transport chain. This ETC, like the one found in cellular respiration, contains cytochrome C. The ETC uses the energy in these electrons to pump protons from the stroma into the thylakoid. Remember, protons are hydrogen atoms with an electron removed. After this, the low-energy electrons are transferred to a molecule called plastocyanin, which puts them into the reaction center of PS1. We will see what PS1 does in a little bit, but let's see what happens to those protons first. There is a high concentration of protons in the thylakoid, and the only way they can diffuse back into the stroma is through ATP synthase. And when they do this, ATP synthase phosphorylates ADP to make ATP. Remember, this process is called chemiosmosis. This diagram shows the same series of events we just discussed, but the molecules have more realistic shapes. Since the ATP molecules are made with solar energy, this type of phosphorylation is called photophosphorylation. The same initial events that occur in PS2 also occur in PS1. The pigments in the photosystem absorb the photons and energy is passed from one pigment to another until the energy reaches the reaction center. The special chlorophyll molecules optimally absorb energy with wavelengths of 700 nanometers. P700 boosts the electrons out of the photosystem to the ETC. Now here's the main differences. The electrons absorbed by PS1 are not used to pump protons. Instead, they are passed to an electron acceptor called NADP to form NADPH. This molecule is an electron carrier very similar to NADH. To distinguish which is used in photosynthesis, The P in NADPH can stand for photosynthesis. But remember, the electrons of P680 of PS2 were boosted, used to pump protons, and dumped into P700 of PS1. Photosynthesis cannot continue until those electrons are replaced. So how does this happen? Now is the time for water to be hydrolyzed. When water is split by an enzyme in PS2, electrons escape. And those electrons are transferred to P680 in PS2. In addition, the products of the hydrolysis of water are protons and oxygen. This diagram shows an overview of the light reactions in terms of energy. The energy from photons are used to boost electrons from P680, and their energy is used to pump protons and eventually make ATP. The energy from photons are also used to boost electrons from P700 and eventually make NADPH. Here are the main points to remember about the light reactions. ATP is the product of PS2, NADPH is the product of PS1, and the hydrolysis of water is to replace the electrons in PS2. A byproduct, oxygen, is released into the atmosphere or can be used by the plant during cellular respiration.